In the winter of 1913, a respected Swiss psychiatrist stood at the edge of an abyss that had opened inside his own mind. Carl Gustav Jung, then 38 years old, began to see visions, terrible, luminous visions that erupted from somewhere beneath the floorboards of his rational consciousness. He saw blood covering the land of Europe. He saw the dead rising from their graves. He saw a voice that was not his own speaking through his mouth. His colleagues whispered that he was going mad. His wife watched him descend into realms she could not follow. But Jung did something that would alter the course of modern psychology forever. He did not run from the darkness. He turned towards it. He bowed to it. He asked it its name. What Jung discovered in that descent was not madness, but a map. A cartography of the soul that had been known to mystics for millennia, but forgotten by the rational West. He called it the shadow. But this was no simple concept of suppressed negativity or Freudian repression. The shadow, Jung realized, was the gatekeeper to spiritual evolution, the threshold guardian that every soul must face before it can awaken to its true nature. 8 centuries before Jung sat in his study overlooking Lake Zurich, Rumi wandered the streets of Konya, drunk on divine love, composing poems that spoke of the same mystery in different language. "The wound is the place where the light enters you," Rumi whispered across time. Jung, in his Red Book, wrote, "If you marry the ordered to the chaos, you produce the divine child, the supreme meaning beyond meaning and meaninglessness." They were speaking of the same alchemical process, the same descent into darkness that paradoxically becomes the path of illumination. Tonight we trace that path. We follow Jung's footprints into the underworld of the psyche and discover what the Sufis already knew, that your spiritual evolution is not about transcending the darkness, but about learning to see in the dark. We explore how the shadow, that reviled, rejected, feared aspect of yourself, is actually the crucible in which the soul is forged. But I must tell you plainly, this is not comfortable knowledge. This is not self-help. This is soulcraft, and like all true craft, it requires you to work with materials that burn. Before we descend further into this mystery, into the depths where Jung and Rumi both walked with trembling hands and opened hearts, I invite you to pause for just a moment. If what you have heard already has stirred something ancient within you, if you sense that this is not mere theory but a mirror being held up to your own unfolding, consider subscribing to this channel and joining this crucible of seekers. Press the notification bell so you do not miss these transmissions from the depths. And if this theme resonates with your own journey, if you have felt the pull of something dark and luminous within you, if you have met your own shadow in the mirror, or know someone walking this perilous path right now, leave a comment below. Your words, your witness, becomes part of the great work. We are not alone in this. We never have been. Let us begin where Jung began, with the realization that we do not know ourselves. The ego, that small, chattering voice that narrates your life, that says, "I am a good person," or "I would never do such a thing," is not the totality of who you are. It is merely the tip of an iceberg, and beneath the waterline lies a vast, dark continent of psychic material that Jung called the unconscious. Within that unconscious dwells the shadow, everything you have deemed unacceptable about yourself and cast into exile. Every impulse of rage you swallowed as a child, every sexual desire you labeled as shameful, every ambition you judged as selfish, every vulnerability you armored against because the world punished softness. All of this material does not disappear. It takes up residence in the basement of your being, and from there it runs your life in ways you cannot see. Jung observed this in his patients again and again. The man who prided himself on his rationality would erupt in irrational fits of emotion. The woman who performed perfect kindness would have dreams of murder. The spiritual seeker who spoke endlessly of love would unconsciously sabotage every intimate relationship. The shadow was speaking, but no one was listening. The Sufis understood this dynamic through a different lens, but arrived at the same truth. They spoke of the nafs al-amara, the commanding self, the ego self that is enslaved to its base desires and yet utterly convinced of its own righteousness. The great Persian poet Attar tells the story of a dervish who spent decades in prayer and fasting, convinced he had conquered his lower nature. One night he had a dream in which he saw himself in the marketplace, dressed in rags, stealing bread. He awoke in horror and went to his master. "I am not a thief," he protested. "I have spent my life in devotion." The master smiled sadly and said, "But have you fed the thief inside you? Have you acknowledged his hunger? Or have you simply locked him in a cell and pretended he does not exist?" The dervish wept, for he understood that his spiritual practice had been a form of warfare against himself, and in that war, no one wins. This is the first and most crucial teaching. The shadow cannot be destroyed. It can only be integrated. And integration requires first that you see it, name it, and acknowledge that it is yours. Jung developed a practice he called active imagination, a method of descending into the unconscious and dialoguing with the autonomous figures that dwell there. He would sit in silence, often in his tower, and wait. Eventually, figures would emerge. A wise old man, a dangerous woman, a child, a beast. He would ask them questions. He would listen to their answers. He would paint them, sculpt them, write their words in his red book, with the care of a medieval monk illuminating scripture. This was not fantasy. This was not daydreaming. This was an encounter with the objective psyche, the realm where the personal unconscious meets the collective unconscious, where your individual shadow blends into the archetypal shadows of humanity itself. And what Jung discovered was staggering. These figures had knowledge he did not possess. They could see things about his life, his choices, his destiny that his conscious mind was blind to. They were not hallucinations. They were emissaries from the self, that vast central archetype that Jung understood to be the totality of the psyche, the God image within. The Sufis called this practice muraqabah, meditation, contemplation, the watching of the heart. In the silence of the Sufi lodge, the seeker would sit and observe the thoughts, feelings, and images that arose from the depths. But they did not merely observe passively. They engaged. They asked the shadow figures, "Who are you? What do you want from me? What have I refused to see?" Rumi writes, "Do not turn your head. Keep looking at the bandaged place. That is where the light enters you." The bandaged place, the wound, the shame, the rejected part, is precisely where the spiritual evolution begins. Not in the heights of transcendence, but in the depths of what you have refused to feel. The Western spiritual seeker often makes a fatal error. They attempt to leap directly to the light, to bypass the shadow through positive thinking, through affirmations, through the fantasy of being a purely spiritual being untainted by darkness. Jung called this inflation, the ego identifying with the archetype of the self and believing itself to be divine without having done the work of integration. The result is always catastrophic. The repressed shadow returns with a vengeance. The spiritual teacher is caught in a sex scandal. The healer becomes an addict. The peaceful activist explodes in rage. This is not hypocrisy. This is the inevitable eruption of unintegrated psychic material. Let us go deeper still. Jung identified stages of individuation, the process by which the fragmented psyche is made whole. The first stage is the encounter with the persona, the mask you wear for the world, the role you perform. Most people spend their entire lives believing they are the persona. I am a doctor. I am a mother. I am a success. But life has a way of shattering the persona. Illness, divorce, failure, loss, these are not merely misfortunes. They are initiations. They strip away the mask and reveal what lies beneath. The second stage is the encounter with the shadow, which we have been exploring. But here is where it becomes truly alchemical. The shadow is not only personal. Beneath your individual shadow lies the collective shadow, the darkness of your culture, your ancestors, your species. When you begin to integrate your personal shadow, you inevitably touch the collective. You begin to feel the grief of the world, the rage of the oppressed, the guilt of the oppressor, the terror and beauty of existence itself. This is overwhelming. This is why so few complete the journey. But those who do not turn away discover something miraculous. The shadow contains not only darkness, but gold. The alchemists understood this. They spoke of the prima materia, the base matter, the rejected stone, the substance that must be gathered from the dung heap and the gutter. This prima materia is the shadow. It is everything you despise, everything you have cast out. And the great work of alchemy is to take this base matter and, through a series of operations, calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, transform it into gold. Not literal gold, but the philosopher's stone, the lapis philosophorum, which the alchemists understood to be a symbol of the individuated self. Jung spent years studying alchemical texts and realized they were not instructions for metallurgy, but maps of psychological and spiritual transformation. The blackening, the nigredo, is the encounter with the shadow. The whitening, the albedo, is the purification that follows. The reddening, the rubedo, is the integration, the marriage of opposites, the union of conscious and unconscious. And the final stage, the golden yellowing, is the emergence of the self, not the ego self, but the transpersonal self, the God within. Rumi speaks of this same process in the language of love. Love is the bridge between you and everything, he writes. But what kind of love? Not the sentimental love of greeting cards, but a fierce, consuming love that demands everything. The Sufis speak of fana, annihilation, the death of the ego in the presence of the beloved. This is terrifying. The ego does not want to die. It will do anything to preserve itself to maintain the illusion of control. But the path of spiritual evolution requires that the ego submit, that it bow before something greater. Jung called this the axis mundi, the central axis around which the psyche rotates, the connection between ego and self. When that axis is established, when the ego learns to serve the self rather than rule the psyche, transformation occurs. You begin to live not from the small self with its fears and agendas, but from the vast self with its incomprehensible wisdom. This does not mean you become perfect. It means you become whole. You integrate the saint and the sinner, the light and the shadow, the human and the divine. There is a story from the Sufi tradition that illuminates this beautifully. A seeker came to a master and said, "I have been meditating for 20 years. I have seen visions of paradise and hell. I have spoken with angels and demons, but I still do not know God. What am I missing?" The master said, "You have been traveling outward into visions and experiences, but God is not found in visions. God is found in the one who is watching the visions." The seeker was silent. The master continued, "Turn around, look at the looker. Who is the one seeking?" In that moment, the seeker realized that he had been searching for his own face. The one he sought was the one seeking. Jung arrived at the same conclusion through a different route. He realized that the self was not something to be attained, but something to be recognized. It was already present, already whole, already divine. The work of individuation was not about becoming something new, but about removing the veils that obscured what had always been true. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who you should be, not who the world demands, but who you are beneath all the layers of conditioning, trauma, and fear. But let us not romanticize this process. The integration of the shadow is painful. It requires you to look at the parts of yourself you have spent a lifetime avoiding. It requires you to admit that you are capable of cruelty, of selfishness, of cowardice. It requires you to acknowledge the ways you have harmed others, the ways you have betrayed yourself. This is not comfortable. This is humbling in the truest sense. It brings you down to the humus, the earth, the ground of being." The Sufis have a practice called muhasaba, self-accounting, the daily examination of one's actions and intentions. At the end of each day, the Sufi sits in silence and reviews everything they did and said, asking, "Where did I act from ego? Where did I act from essence? Where did I deceive myself? Where did I see clearly?" This practice is not about self-flagellation. It is about radical honesty, about developing the capacity to see yourself without the distortions of ego. Jung developed a similar practice through the analysis of dreams. He understood that dreams were messages from the unconscious, often from the shadow itself. The figures that appear in your dreams, the stranger who threatens you, the lover who betrays you, the child who needs you, are aspects of your own psyche seeking recognition. To work with dreams is to engage in a dialogue with the parts of yourself that have been exiled. Jung would often ask his patients, "What is the dream asking of you? What quality or energy does this figure embody? And how can you integrate that energy into your waking life?" This is the alchemical work. This is how the base matter is transformed into gold. You do not reject the shadow figure in the dream. You do not fight it or banish it. You ask it what it needs. You offer it a seat at the table of your consciousness. You learn from it. And here we arrive at the great paradox, the mystery that both Jung and Rumi circled around for their entire lives. The shadow is the guardian of the treasure. The very thing you fear most, the very quality you have rejected most violently, contains the key to your liberation. The man who has repressed his anger discovers that within that anger is the power to set boundaries, to protect what is sacred. The woman who has denied her ambition discovers that within that ambition is the creative force to birth something new into the world. The seeker who has rejected their sexuality discovers that within that sexuality is the erotic energy that connects them to the divine. Rumi writes, "The wound is where the light enters." Jung writes, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." They are saying the same thing. Your salvation lies not in transcending your humanity, but in embracing it fully, shadows and all. We have traveled far tonight, through the depths of the Jungian underworld, through the gardens of Persian mysticism, through the furnace of alchemical transformation. And what have we found? Not a technique, not a system, but a truth so simple and so terrifying that most will turn away from it. You are not who you think you are. The small self, the ego, the persona, this is a construction, a fiction, necessary but not ultimate. Beneath it lies the shadow, and beneath the shadow lies the self, vast, luminous, terrifying, and unutterably beautiful. Your spiritual evolution is not a journey away from the darkness, but a journey through it. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the gatekeeper, the initiator, the one who tests whether you are ready to bear the weight of your own wholeness. Every rejection, every failure, every moment of shame and humiliation, these are not obstacles to your awakening. They are the very substance of it. They are the prima materia, the base matter that must be gathered and refined in the alchemical vessel of your own awareness. Jung predicted your spiritual evolution the moment he understood that the psyche has its own wisdom, its own trajectory towards wholeness. He saw that the modern crisis of meaning, the epidemic of depression and anxiety, was not a sign of pathology, but a sign of potential, the soul crying out for integration, for a return to the depths, for the courage to face what we have buried. Rumi predicted the same thing 8 centuries earlier when he wrote, "Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. What you really love is not the persona, not the mask, not the performance. What you really love is the truth of your own being, however dark and luminous it may be." So I leave you with this question, not to be answered quickly, but to be carried into the silence of your own contemplation. What is the part of yourself that you have most fervently rejected? What is the quality, the impulse, the memory that you have locked in the basement of your being and hoped would never see the light of day? That, precisely that, is where your work begins. That is the threshold. That is the shadow's mirror, reflecting back to you not your damnation, but your divinity in disguise. The Sufis tell us that the path to God is a pathless path, and yet it begins exactly where you stand. Jung tells us that the journey of individuation is unique for each soul, and yet it follows a pattern as old as consciousness itself. Descent, encounter, integration, ascent. Not an escape from the human condition, but a full inhabitation of it. Not transcendence, but transformation. Not bypassing the shadow, but bowing to it, learning from it, and ultimately recognizing it as an aspect of the very wholeness you seek. In the end, the shadow's mirror shows you this: you are not broken. You have never been broken. You are a fractal of the divine, experiencing itself through the full spectrum of light and darkness, joy and sorrow, creation and destruction. And your spiritual evolution is nothing less than the slow, painful, beautiful remembering of what you have always been. So go now, look in the mirror, and do not turn away.